All right. I'd like to welcome you all out to our session on Arcade. This is a session exclusively on Arcade in the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. If you've attended this session in previous years, it is focused, this has kind of been the main Arcade session at the Dev Summit. You may have noticed that this year there's been a lot more Arcade sessions. We've had, I believe, 6 listed total, so that's exciting. We've been doing this session, I believe this is our 3rd, maybe it's our 4th year doing it. It's fun, I really enjoy it. It's also pretty fast paced, so hopefully it's not too overwhelming. I just want to get a show of hands first off. How many of you have used Arcade already? Played around with it? So a few. How many of you feel like you kind of know what it is, but even though you haven't used it, you get a sense of why we have it? Okay, cool. Hopefully this gives you some inspiration, what you can do in your web apps and even in other places in the ArcGIS platform that you may be using. So by way of introduction, my name is Christian Ekenis. I'm a product engineer on the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. I've been with Esri for 4 years. I work primarily with the rendering, data visualization side, smart mapping, but I also am heavily involved in integration of Arcade into the API. So any questions you have, you can contact me and I can reach out and try to help you out. But I'll also be presenting here with Mohan. Do you want to introduce yourself? Or?
Hi, my name is Mohan Raj. I also work with Christian in ArcGIS JavaScript team. I work on primarily smart mapping, renderers, and legend widget. Cool,
thanks. So let's dive right in. So hopefully we're going to give you an overview of Arcade. It's going to be Arcade language, core concepts, a few snippets and examples, and then we're going to dive into using it with the JavaScript API. And then how many of you have been to this session before in a previous Dev Summit? Anyone? Oh, great, that's perfect. So this is a new section, take your apps to the next level that we haven't done before, so hopefully you find it informative, and I'm curious to hear your feedback on that later. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn over to Mohan to introduce Arcade.
Okay, so sometimes you might have a data set or a service that is a little bit different than what you might intend to do. So this is where Arcade is useful. Arcade is a simple expression language that allows you to provide an extra bit of logic to make your maps more dynamic. That extra bit of logic can be used to change how a symbol is rendered or how a label is displayed. Arcade is absolutely not a full-scale programming language or a scripting language. It is never intended to replace languages like Python or JavaScript. Its goal is to be lightweight, simple, secure, and be portable. And you can think of Arcade as a simple cell calculation in an Excel sheet, or a simple calculator that takes an input, evaluates it, and gives you the output. Now, let us take a look at a simple test app where Arcade is useful. So this test app uses a weather station data service to display the air temperature values at various locations. On your first glance, you might think like this data is not very readable. You can make it readable by rounding these raw data values and appending the Fahrenheit unit at the end of the labels. So maybe you can do this on the server side, but you might not want to do that because of the network overhead, or you might not have the right access to the service. So using Arcade, you can do this on the client side. So I'll quickly demonstrate how you can do this on the client side. So you can use this Arcade expression in the label expression info to round the data value that you get from the service and append the Fahrenheit unit. You might be wondering what this $feature variable is. $feature is a global variable in Arcade that allows you to access the fields of a feature in a layer. So once I save this and if I reload the map, all the variables, all the raw data values are rounded, and Fahrenheit value or unit is appended to the labels. All of this is done on the client side. And In certain parts of the world, you might be needing these values to be displayed in Celsius rather than in Fahrenheit. So again, you can use Arcade to convert all of these raw data values into Celsius values. So again, I can use the Arcade expression to apply the unit conversion formula around that value and again append the Celsius unit. Once I save this, and you can see all the raw data values are converted into Celsius units. So you initially have a data set which is a little different, but using Arcade, you have applied a extra bit of logic to solve that problem.
All right. So when we first started this project, probably the most common question we got is why, right? Why would you guys invest, or why would we as a company invest so much time in basically trying to write our own programming language, our own scripting or expression language, when there are so many other options out there? And we really wrestled with this for a long time. I mean, why try to reinvent the wheel, right? But it came down to a few fundamental things. We operate on a platform, which means that when you create a web map or a web app, the app should run on all the environments that we support. So if you create a web map in ArcGIS Online, you want to be able to render that exactly the same way in ArcGIS Pro. As likewise, if you have a mobile app that you develop with ArcGIS, you want that to be able to work seamlessly as well. So if you're writing an Arcade expression, such as what Mohan did with a label, that label will not display properly if it only runs in JavaScript. And there's a few challenges with this, right? Or many challenges that we came to find out. Number one, and the challenges differ depending on what you're targeting. So in mobile apps, the size of the language or the executable really matters a lot. We want to make it as small, as compact, and lightweight as possible. That eliminated a lot of options, such as Python. It can be very heavyweight, and so we wanted something that's lightweight, simple, easy to use. Also, security is a big issue. We had a number of people say, well, you've supported JavaScript functions and renderers and also in labels and pop-ups and things like that before. Why can't you just use JavaScript? Well, that introduces all sorts of security vulnerabilities. You can't just blindly take JavaScript from another source and run it in a different app, because you introduce cross-site scripting issues there. And that's true of mobile apps as well. And you want to be able to and so we also wanted to have syntax that would work across all these devices. And so that's where this concept of Arcade came up. So the goals of Arcade are, we want it to be portable, so write it in Pro, have it run everywhere else, or likewise across the platform. We want it to be secure. So Arcade is self-contained. We don't want the expression to alter its environment. We just want it to run in its own environment and then without compromising security. And then, of course, lightweight. And the fourth thing is we want it to be geospatial. We're a geospatial company, and we want geospatial to be a first-class citizen in the language. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the language features that Arcade has to offer. So it's designed for simple expressions. You saw that with Mohan's example. You can write a single line, a single line expression similar to an Excel formula. You could think of it like a field calculator, and it will implicitly return a value. We also made it case insensitive, so we simplify issues with different databases and things like that. So technically, you could declare a variable and reference that same variable with different casing, and it will work. I don't like to do that, but you could do that. And also, dictionary syntax for field. access, but we also wanted to support more complex things. You guys are building apps that do some pretty complicated things, some really cool things. And so we wanted to allow for a type system, explicit typecasting and also implicit typecasting to make it simpler to use, but also flow control and user-defined functions. And so, and again, it's important to emphasize that these scripts just, all they do is they run against a feature and they return a value. They can't alter their environment. Sometimes people want to display buffers and maps and format text in certain ways, and that's not what Arcade is designed to do. It's all about the content. So just returning the value. And so with that, I just wanted to, if you haven't seen this page before on the developer site, developers.arcgis.com/arcade, we have some great documentation we've put together, guides on how to get started, and then this goes over structure and logic, as well as the type system that we support. And we have a set of functions that are native in Arcade that you can take advantage of. Notice that we do have this geospatial first concept with the geometry functions. But we have also some very helpful date functions that you may find useful, as well as these logical functions. And and also this playground. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Mohan, who's gonna demonstrate a few scripts and show off some of the features that we have natively in Arcade and how you can use the playground to do so.
So playground is where you can write your own expressions and see how they're being calculated. Let us start by writing a simple expression, hello Avengers. Now when I click the test button, you will be able to see the result over here along with its type. Now you can also do some mathematical expressions like 20 into 100 plus 19, which gives you 2019 type number. And one of the primary constructs of Arcade is the concept of implicit returns. The single line expressions like these are considered as implicit returns. In a multi-line expression, the value of the last statement of the script is considered as the result of the script. Now, you can also explicitly specify return and it would still return the value. Now, Arcade also supports variable declaration. Like you can declare a variable using var keyword, like var a is equal to 20, where p is equal to 2000, and if you do a plus b, it should return 2020. And you can also reassign a declared variable of the same type, or you can also reassign to a different type, like hello. So if I run test now, you should be seeing like the variable b is implicitly typecasted to a string and got appended to variable a. Just like in JavaScript, you can also do comments in Arcade by doing 2 forward slashes for a single line comment and forward slash and asterisk for multi-line comments. Now you can also write your own functions in Arcade. Let's write a small function called say hi from a person, and that person A says hi. Now since this is the last statement of this function, this is considered as an implicit return, even though if I don't write the return over there. So if we call the function say hi, and that person is Thanos, then Thanos says hi. Now Arcade also supports flow control statements like if else. Let me demonstrate those by adding one more person. Let us call that person B, and if that person B is Hulk, then person A says hi. Else if person B is Thor, then person A says bye. Now let us suppose that person B is Thor here, then Thanos says bye. That person B is Hulk, You can see that Thanos says hi. So this is a general demonstration of if-else. And ArcGIS also has a full type system support. So there are a lot of types like number type, text, array, boolean, date, dictionary, and a lot of GIS specific types like feature sets. You can find more about these types in detail in the guide page. Now, ArcGIS also supports for loops. So let us write a for loop that counts numbers 1 to 10. So let the result be 0. Let a sample for loop where I is equal to 1, I less than or equal to 10, I plus plus, and our result equal to result plus I. You can also do shorthand notations like in JavaScript, like R plus equals I, and it would still add those values. And you can see the sum of the numbers from 1 to 10 is 55. Now, ArcGIS also supports a for-in loop to loop through objects or arrays. Let us go through a simple array. 3, where result is 0, and where index in array and R plus equals array of index. And if you return the result, it should be 6. Now, ArcGIS has a rich set of functions that you can use to make your map more exciting. So let us concentrate on one function, which is date. Now, date is an overloaded function, so you can either specify a timestamp over here, or you can also specify the year 2012, December. Since months in ArcGIS starts from 0, the December month is number 11 and 21. So you can see the date is 21st December 2012. And you can also do some date calculations using date add. Like if I want to calculate the date, which is 10 days from now, I can do that. So it's 17 March 2019. If I want to find a date which is 10 days earlier from now, it's 25th February 2019. ArcGIS does this for you. And you can also find, do some other date calculations like calculation of an age. Like if I want to find my age, so suppose I was born on 1989, January 1st, and in years, so I'm about 30 years old now. So if I want to calculate my age in seconds, I can do that as well. So it says 9, 5 to something. So let us properly format this number by using a text function and a formatter. And you can clearly see that it's 952 million. So 50 million more for my billionth second. So let us try this ArcGIS expression in the playground as well. So ArcGIS has a feature which is initially configured that you can use and play with. So if you test this field value, it should display value 1, but you can edit that value to be any value that you want to test. Here we want to test the temperature value, so I'll type in something like 78.444. And when I do test, it should be displaying that number. Now, let us use the ArcGIS math function round to round this value and append it with unit Fahrenheit. And you can see this is what we displayed in the demo. Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Mohan. So the playground can be very useful when you're writing your scripts. It helps you debug. We also have a console function that helps you log messages, so you can go through there, and if you're writing complicated functions, you can test your values there. And so I find myself in the playground all the time because it's really hard to just write a script within a web app. So you may have noticed that towards the end, Mohan changed the profile of the editor. So this concept of profiles can be a little confusing with ArcGIS. So When we first introduced Arcade, we only supported 2 profiles. It was the visualization profile and labeling. But since then, we've added several more. And in the most recent release of Arcade, Arcade 1.5, we introduced Feature Z profile and also these attribute rule profiles. So what is a profile? Profile defines the purpose, rules, and context for executing Arcade expressions. So basically, what global variables are available to you in Arcade? In the pop-up, it's going to be different from what it is in the renderer. What's the context? The context is, you can think of it as the pop-up itself. It could be the label class that you're using or the field calculator. And some other rules might be the profile defines what type is required as a return type. So for example, in the visualization profile, you cannot return a dictionary. You can only return a number or a string, because when you are rendering based on a count, the Arcade won't, or the renderer in the JavaScript app won't understand what a dictionary is doing there. I shaded these other profiles in gray because we don't currently implement those in the API. I've already had a few questions from some of you about attribute rules. That's something that's ongoing in our discussions. So you can play around with what the profiles in the playground itself, and you can also see what's different in the editor in ArcGIS Online, and I'll show that a little later. So if I click on visualization profile, what's kind of neat is that when you go to the functions, the profile will also tell you which functions are allowed and not allowed. So we introduced feature set support recently, and so the playground will tell you which functions are not available if you search for them. And something else, I'm not sure if Mohan showed this, is you can also get the documentation straight there in the playground itself. So that's pretty cool. All right, let's head into the meat of this session. How do you use it in apps that use the ArcGIS API for JavaScript? So the main cases are your renderer, your pop-up template, your label class, or if you're working in a 3D scene in your feature expression info, and I'll show examples of all those. So here's an example of a pretty straightforward common renderer, a class breaks renderer, where you want to just visualize the voter turnout, let's say. And so the way that we reference Arcade expressions in JavaScript are always as strings, and that is done, and you can just pass in your expression as a string, and it's usually in a property called value expression. So without Arcade, you would typically pass in a field name, maybe a normalization field in the renderer. Here you don't need any of that. You just pass in value expression, put in your Arcade, and then it will render. Labels, so Mohan demonstrated this one. Let's say you have your weather stations and you just want to display the station name next to your point. You just reference $feature, that station name. Something else to keep in mind is, what if I have a long script? Something that you can do, that we do in our samples, for example, is we'll set up separate script tags in your HTML, or you could set up a different file altogether in your app, and then you can set the type of script to something other than JavaScript. You could be fancy and say type text / ArcGIS Arcade or text / plain. It doesn't really matter as long as you're telling the browser, do not execute this as JavaScript, because that's not what it is. And it's also very common for people to mix up Arcade syntax with JavaScript syntax. They'll try to do things like get the length property of an array. We don't have that in Arcade. You would pass the array to the count function in order to do that. So once you have the script in another tag, you just get that element by ID, and you refer to the text property, and you can use it there. So something else I wanted to show was this. Was the profiles page in the guide. So this is the rules I was talking about. So if we go to visualization, You'll get a short description of what this is, and here's the globals. So you have access to your feature. So that's all of the attributes in your feature. Also, you have access to your geometry. So if you want to do something geospatial in nature with your renderer, you can use the geometry object of your feature. Also the view scale. And then you can see here that it defines the return types. If you want to see how this works across the platform, we've included links in the doc to take you to another page that shows you examples as well. So feature Z, you only have access to the feature, and you can only return a number, because elevation values have to be numbers. They can't be strings or dictionaries or anything else, or dates. And you see pop-ups. We'll talk about all of these options in just a second. So what are the new features since last Dev Summit? We introduced this notion of feature sets in arcade expressions. These can be extremely powerful. They can also be extremely debilitating, depending on how you use them. So feature sets represent a connection to another layer or set of features, and that can be either in memory or on another service. They're lazy, iterable, and chainable. So here's an example. Let's say you have a layer that represents some kind of project area, and you want to know all of the sensitive areas that are near this project area. You can refer to that layer using a feature set functions. For example, feature set by name, and this $map global is basically a collection, represents a collection of all the layers in your map. And you're saying, look at all these layers and give me the one with the name public lands. I only want to return the class attribute, and I want the geometries back. And so then you can call this filter function, say I only want the sensitive lands, and I want to know the count of the sensitive land features that intersect my project area feature. So it takes a little second to wrap your head around it, but this is only available in your pop-up in your apps. You cannot do this in renderers or labels, and the main reason for that is because this will kill your performance if you try to do that, because we're actually executing a query in the process. So this query, the arcade parser will build a query object, say I want you to give me all the features where the class is sensitive and where it intersects this area. So it builds that all into one query, and it sends it to the server, returns it back, and then you can do things on the client with it. So on the pop-up, you can get reasonable performance with that, because you're just executing it one time on each click. When you're trying to render thousands of features, that's not going to fly. So let's go into some demos. And if I need to bump the screen size up or anything, just let me know. So we got here the same layer Mohan showed before, but notice that we're doing a lot more than just one label. So this is to demonstrate how you can do more with Arcade. So I've actually got 4 label classes for each feature. I'm displaying the temperature, so this is what Mohan did, relative humidity, wind speed and direction, and the name of the station. So let's see what's going on here. Let me bump this up just so I know you guys can see it. So here's the temperature label class. You saw this already. Just getting that string, passing it to your label expression info, setting the symbol, and then we have wind direction. I'm getting this from a separate script tag because this one is more complicated. Humidity, very similar to temperature, and the name is what I showed before when you just want a station name. So what's going on with that other one, this green label over here? Well, we have a field in the service called wind direct. That field has a number, it's a number between 0 and 360. If you put that number in your map, most people are going to probably be like, what direction is that? I can't conceptualize what you're talking about. So we can actually take advantage of some logical functions in Arcade to help out. We also have wind speed, and that's in miles per hour. So we're going to take advantage of when. When is a function where we say, when this expression is true, return this value. So I'm saying, when the speed is 0, I don't want to display direction. What's the point? There's no wind. When it's between these two numbers, we'll say it's north, and so on and so forth all the way around the compass. And then we'll return the speed plus the direction, and so we get these labels over here. And I don't see any areas here in Europe where it's 0 for the speed. I think Southern California, yeah, right here, you see that 0 miles per hour, so now you don't get the wind direction. So you can take the data that you have without recalculating fields, and you wouldn't want to do that with weather data if it's changing all the time anyway. You don't want to be adding new fields, so this is a nice way to handle that. So it also works just the same in 3D. So here we did the same script, or the same arcade for that wind direction and speed, and we added some 3D symbology with wind direction and rendered it there to show that you can do it in 3D as well. So here's a case with rendering. I have a service that tells me the total number of people belonging to different political parties: Democratic Party, Republican, Independent, or other. But I want to make an election style map that shows the predominant category in each county. This is what came out. Normally, without Arcade, you would have to go into the field calculator and calculate a new field that says this is the max category: Democrat, Republican, or Independent, or other. But you don't have to do that with Arcade. Right here, I'm grabbing my features. They have very useful names, as you can tell. So I'm going to assign them to variables that I can work with, passing them to an array. And then I'm going to use another function available in Arcade: decode. What is this doing? Decode you can think of as matching. It matches a value to a string. So I'm going to say, I want to get the max count, or the max number in the array for each feature, and I want to match it with a string. So I'm passing in the value, and if the max is Republican, then I'm going to return Republican. If it's not, then it's going to go through the rest of the list. That's as simple as it is. You may have noticed some opacity in there. So I'm just going for the strength or the dominance, so to speak. So I'm going to do get the max count, and I'm going to divide it by total and multiply by 100. And the reason I do that is because it just makes for a nicer visualization. If I didn't want that, I could just remove the opacity, and this is what the visualization would look like. But I think the other one looks a little nicer. I get more of a sense of the nuances with this data. How many of you are in the Midwest or experienced the polar vortex lately? I'm so glad I wasn't there. I feel sorry for you. But must have been an interesting experience, right? This is not data from that time, but when I was working on this app, you were the first people I thought of, so to speak. It's the same weather station data, and we saw in the news all sorts of things like, this is what the air temperature measured was, this is what it actually felt like. And I believe it's NOAA, or the National Weather Service, they have definitions for this felt like temperature. What does that mean? How do you calculate it? So I went there and I used Arcade to calculate it. And I created this map. So first with the calculation. So wind chill, it's basically a function of temperature, wind speed, and humidity. And so you can calculate wind chill like so. And they've got all these constants, but you can use Arcade to do this. And then I do this one function again. This is for, I believe, so that's the felt temperature. So so basically you have different conditions for, like, if the temperature is less than 50 and the wind speed is greater than this, then this is what the felt temperature is. And so I wanted to return the difference between the felt temperature and the actual air temperature. So what's the measured temperature, but I want to see how are those two different. In this case, it's the wind chill, and here's the heat index. So where is it hotter, where is it colder, and how different are they? I pass that expression to my renderer. So here it's just a simple renderer, and here I'm passing my value expression. I'm saying this is the difference between the apparent temperature and the measured air temperature, and I'm giving them nice labels. And then you get this map. So in this particular day, I can't remember which one, which date this was, but it was several years ago. It was significantly, the wind chill registered a felt temperature significantly colder than the measured air temperature in the Midwest. But then of course in the Southern Hemisphere, you're gonna see hot temperatures where it feels much hotter than normal. So you can do some pretty cool stuff visually using Arcade if you don't have those fields available to you. This is an example of using Arcade in a pop-up on a globe. So here I'm taking in a live feed of the USGS earthquakes, and I'm actually rendering the color based on whether the earthquake occurred in the daytime or the nighttime. This is a global data set, so daytime and nighttime is all relative, right, to your time zone. Something that's nice about this data is the USGS provides a field called TZ, which is time zone difference. And so you can use the date functions to calculate the time that earthquake happened locally. So it's not just the time of the browser or the UTC time, it's where it happened. And so what does that exactly look like? This is all I had to do right here for the renderer, was do a date add from the UTC time to the time zone offset, and I did it in minutes and got the hour to render it whether it was day or night. And then when it came to the pop-up, you'll see that in this case, let's see, value expression. Oh, it's expression infos for the pop-up. That's label. Oh. I'll show you another pop-up example where I can find it. Here's an example of pop-up as well. I've got data for employment in the United States, and a lot of times in the news we see things like unemployment rate, but we have data for the people in the labor force, people out of the labor force, and the total number of people working, but we don't have a value for the people that are not working. And what I mean by not working is that includes everyone that doesn't have a full-time paying job. And so what unemployment is it's the percentage of people who are in the labor force, which means they are looking for a job, they're eligible for work, but they don't have work. And so that number is usually much smaller than what is representative of the actual population not working. Now, this map isn't, I'm not pointing out areas where people are lazy or they don't want to work, because that includes things like working mothers, it includes things like people in the military even who aren't working full time, it includes people who are retired. So, so that, just to give you context to what this data is showing. So unemployment rate in this feature is 9.3, but we'll use Arcade to calculate that 41% of the population actually isn't working in a full-time job. And so so you have Arcade expression infos. This is how it works in the pop-up. You set a name to your expression. You can give it a title if you want to render it in the table nicely. And then you refer to the expression in the expression property. And then you pass those Arcade expression infos to your pop-up template, like so. Right here, there's an expression infos. And then you can refer to that expression using expression/expression name. And so you can handle the formatting. And then when it comes to actually displaying, so this is displaying it in the table. So here I'm referring to it, and then I add some formatting options. And so you'll note that I'm also doing several Arcade expressions. So that particular expression I just described is up here. So I have Oh, it's in the expression infos. It's just subtracting two fields. Total population 16 and older, total population employed. That's all I'm doing for that particular one, but I'm also doing other things. That's for the total, and then there's the percentage. I'm using that nice round function. All right, let's go ahead and pop back to the slides. So this is a section that, that we haven't done before that I think was a lot of fun. So you can write arcade expressions directly in your apps just like we demonstrated. String value, script tags, things like that. If you know what your arcade is already going to be, then you can do that. But 90% of the time, you're probably going to get your arcade from somewhere else. And that 90% is likely ArcGIS Online, whether it's you writing the arcade expression or your GIS analyst or some other user writes it there. That's probably where you're going to read it, and then it's just going to run nicely. You don't need to deal with it in your app. But if you do need to deal with it in the app, then you can do something nice for your users, and that's generate the expression for them. There may be cases where you have an app that has UI elements where the user selects something and then you want to regenerate the renderer, or you want to set the pop-up template to be very specific to a particular use case. I'm thinking things like on-the-fly site suitability analysis or on-the-fly data exploration. You can write functions that will generate that arcade, pass it to the pop-up or to the renderer, and it will do things for your users. So what does that look like? So here in ArcGIS Online, this is what I was describing before. If you are going to be writing expressions, I just want to point out areas where you can do so. If you're doing it in the renderer, you find this create a custom expression, and then you can open up this arcade expression editor. It looks just like the pop-up or the playground. And you can run your expressions, test them. You still get the doc and all the functions just like you do elsewhere. Super handy. Unlike the playground, this is using your data. So if I'm going in here to see the values, this is your actual field values. So it's very handy to be using ArcGIS Online for these workflows. That's where you do it in the renderer, and then you could do it in the pop-up like so, configure pop-up, and you have attribute expressions down here. If you add one, then the same editor will pop up. And we are smart about it, so when you search for functions, it will restrict the functions to what's allowed in that profile. In this particular map, the reason why I'm going to describe it is because I'm going to use it in one of these demos for generating expressions, is I looked at education variables in Mexico, and in particular, this one jumped out at me was the number of people that did not go to school. They were so detailed in their data, you can infer that this was the number of people that didn't even attempt school. So they had people who started primary school but didn't finish, they finished primary or didn't finish high school, or they went to college but didn't finish with a degree. They have it all broken up, but then they had this value, which was they didn't complete any formal education. And so I divided that by the total population, and you see some really fascinating patterns spatially in Mexico. This is all done using Arcade. So, whoa, okay. Let's go ahead and, oh, this is the feature sets. So let me do this really quick before diving into the generating section. So I mentioned feature set support, in which you can refer to other services and data within your scripts. These are a few examples of how you can do that. Here I've got a layer of hotels and also restaurants. Let's say I click a hotel. I want to be able to display information about the closest restaurant. And so in this particular case, here's my hotel name. The closest restaurant is that one, and it happens to be over here. So in this particular case, I expect the name of the restaurant to match. It does. That's all handled with Arcade. Here's that same map I was showing you. What if you're interested in kind of this neighborhood analysis type concept where I'm not only interested in the value of this feature, but I want to know how it compares to all of its neighbors. So you can do a function in the feature set to to refer to the same layer and say, I want to return all of the features that share a border with this feature. I want to calculate the average, and then tell me whether my feature is above or below that. So it's pretty powerful, the stories you can come up with. In this particular case, we have a layer of parcels and buildings. There's this concept in real estate called floor area ratio. Basically, it's multiplying the number, or taking the floor area of a building and taking the ratio of that to a parcel. So I can see that this is a building with some height to it because it has several floors, and the floor area ratio is 2.3. This is actually a demonstration of how you can do several geometric operations in the same expression. So I'm not only, in this case, this is one building feature, if you can see that black right there, and I'm doing an intersection operation. So it's basically taking a cookie cutter, and then it's calculating the area on the fly. I wrote a blog about this app and how you would write that, and it talks about the concept of floor area ratio, and it shows the arcade that is used to create that. In this case, I want a crime summary. So let's say you have precincts or neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and then you have a point layer of crimes. I'm not displaying it, it's not visible, but I can click a feature, and then you see how it's taken some time. That's because it's executing the query against that service. And so I'm seeing all of the crimes that intersect, and then I want to sort the type of crime based on which one is most common. You can do that in your pop-up, and it refers to another layer. And that's what this expression looks like. It can get a little complicated. So you're doing a sort function, and then displaying that in your pop-up. Let's skip that one for now. So let's talk about generating arcade expressions. Same Mexico data, but here I'm allowing my user to explore different groups. Remember how I said that this has several different fields that are very detailed? So people who completed primary school, didn't complete secondary, they completed their associate's degree, bachelor's degree, or didn't complete those. That's a lot of detail that I don't want to expose. So let's say you want them to explore everyone that didn't complete, or maybe they completed primary school, so you update the visual, they completed secondary school, maybe they completed a university degree. What does that pattern look like? I'm having to generate my arcade every single time in order to get this to work. And how does that work? What's going on here is I wrote this function called generate arcade, passing in a set of field names. So let's say in the case of the people who completed secondary school, I'm going to want to add together the people who completed secondary, didn't complete primary, or who completed high school, college, and all of those, because they are all included in the secondary category. And then I'm going to normalize that data by the total. So what's going on here is I'm getting my value, and all I'm doing is taking a look at that field, appending this $feature, because that's how we access an arcade, and then I'm calling this reduce function on the array, and this will add together all of my field names. And then if a normalization field is provided, divide, multiply by 100, and round it. Return it back to my layer and set the renderer on it. And so if we go back to this app, let's actually see if we can view this in action. So we have generate arcade. So let's go ahead and change this to something else. Completed high school. So the fields that were passed in are these two. But then this percent value is $feature with the field name, $feature there, divided by the total. So you can see that arcade expression is generated there. Then it's going to update the render in the background. If I do primary school, you'll see that those are completely different values that are being used. So you're generating it in behalf of your user. And it's inviting interaction as well. So that can be pretty powerful. This is an example in our JavaScript SDK, our documentation. It goes to show that the arcade expressions also work for map image layer, not just feature layer. So I have this is actually ancestry data that exists in a dynamic workspace on a map service. And so it's doing a client-side join, or a server-side join into that workspace, and then I'm generating arcade to get these nice round numbers. So, and I'm also using that expression within the pop-up to display some nice content. So this is what that looks like. $feature. So, okay, let's bump this down a little bit. And so you can see that I'm getting the value of this select. Come on. And then passing it into an arcade expression and rounding it. And so every time that this selection changes, this value is regenerated on behalf of the user. And then I actually pass that to a smart mapping function here, and that's what generates the renderer for me. One last example. So something we're experimenting with arcade is using it in smart mapping. So as we've built out examples of how to use it in renderers such as predominance, so for example that election data set or the data set with the political parties, that's a very common workflow. And so we want to make this an easier experience for people. So rather than you guys writing that expression every single time and tailoring it to your fields, you can actually pass in that set of fields to a smart mapping function, and we'll generate that arcade for you in the background, pass it back as a renderer, and you just apply that renderer. So I built this little app that allows you to explore predominance variables and for a particular layer ID. In this case, I just chose housing in Boise, Idaho. So I could just set a basic render to see, this is the housing built in 1939 or earlier, the 40s, 50s, 60s. That's cool. You can kind of see the outgrowth as you change. Or you could select multiple fields and create this predominance visualization. So it shows the color of the most common decade in which the house is built. And then the size indicates the total number of houses. So what's going on in this particular visualization? So if I call create continuous renderer, here it is. So these params, so let's go, like this. Oh, this is the wrong one. Create renderer, this one. Okay. So there's this predominance renderer creator in the smart mapping modules. I'm passing in these fields that I selected. So you see them right here. Housing built in each of those decades. And then I'm passing it to this function, and what do I get back? I get back this renderer. And what this renderer actually is, it's not a separate type of renderer. It's still just a unique value renderer. You see the unique value infos here, and you see the categories. But it's not driven by a set of fields. It's actually driven by an arcade expression. So I take a look at it. There it is. So we're generating this large expression in behalf of you, so you don't have to do that for you. Something else we're experimenting with is doing this for pop-ups. Sometimes it's a real pain to configure your own pop-up. And so in this particular app, I generate a pop-up using arcade. I've written functions that allow me to look at different types of pop-up templates that can be generated with Arcade and to see which ones might be more useful to you guys or to your users. Here's like the list in order. I think this one can be interesting. Or maybe you even want like a chart in there. So it renders the houses built by decade, things like that. And so that's not out of the box in smart mapping, but I'm going to share this app with you, the code, after the conference, so you can see what went into generating those. So I have this Arcade Expressions module, and all I'm doing is I just set up a bunch of these functions, and you can see that basically involves passing in a bunch of fields and then letting the Arcade expression take over that I've written. So it's a lot of trial and error, but it works, and it's pretty cool. How many of you do you think would find use out of having these nice, helpful convenience functions like generating pop-up templates? Right? Okay, good. It's good to have that feedback because a lot of people on our side don't see the need for it, but I think that there's a lot of upside here. So we don't have a lot of time left. So there's that function. You guys saw that. And this is what I just explained to you with the smart mapping process. So rather than you generating it, we can do it for you in this step on the flow chart. And along with that, it's this idea of sharing expressions. Some of this came up very early on in the Arcade project. Some of you said, oh, that's a really useful expression. Can we have a way to share that with us so we can copy and paste it? Or is there a way that I can share my expressions with others? Yes, there is. And that is with this Arcade Expressions repo that I set up on the Esri account. This will be linked to in the slides as well. So basically it's split up by profile, and you go in and you can say, I want to look at what expressions are available, and I might find this useful. Several people have contributed already, and it's been really fascinating seeing the use cases that people come up with. You know, in this case, it's like, I just want to return the day of the week. And so they give you the exact template that you copy and paste, and all you have to do is just paste in your field name, wherever that would go. So what is the future of Arcade? We meet every week discussing what should come out later in the year. And so we're talking about things like attachments and new functions that will be helpful to you, convenient. As I try to prototype and build these things out, I come up with things all the time that, oh, it'd be really nice to have a group by function for the statistics or things like that. And that also is up to you a lot of the time. It's, if you have a use case, please tell us about it. We would like to know what you need, and we could put it into the core Arcade. And it would be, and that would allow other people to take advantage of those ideas as well. And so as far as resources go, the documentation we spend a lot of time on, so we've heard people say they find it helpful, so I encourage you to read it. Same with the playground, please use it. Use the editor in ArcGIS Online. I blog pretty heavily about Arcade, so you can go to the ArcGIS blog. This particular link here will be all the posts tagged with Arcade, so go ahead and check those out. It's not just me, but others blog as well. There's this guide page on using Arcade with the JavaScript API. I encourage you to read it. And there's that expression sharing repo. And before I close, I want to encourage you to take the survey on the Esri Events app so you can let us know how we did as presenters and if this content is relevant, or if you'd like us to talk about something else next time. And thanks for coming. And I would like to field questions, so go ahead. Thank you.
Is there a way to show a web page in the pop-up with the hyperlink?
So the question is there a way to show a hyperlink in the pop-up or a web page? No to the web page. Yes, you can do a hyperlink, and in that repo, that sharing repo, people have posted templates for that. Yep. Yes, so the question is, can you do line breaks? So like for label expressions, yes, you can. And that is only allowed in the 4X API, and let me show you what that looks like. So if I go here, sample, label, and then in this case, it's the same weather data, but you notice that this is actually a single expression, and we do a line break.
What about in a pop-up?
In the pop-up, yes, we support that too, I think. There was a bug before reported, and I'm pretty sure we're fixing that, at least at this release.
Yeah, because I tried doing the loop, and then with the loop, getting a line break, and the data.
Yes. So if you recall that so he's talking about there's a bug in the line breaks in the pop-up. Is this app right here? So if you remember the ordered list, this is using the line break in the pop-up. So we fixed that. Yeah. Yes.
Are there any plans to allow querying external data, like non-feature set data in Arcade?
Yes, so the question is, are there plans to allow for querying external data that are like Esri data, correct, in Arcade? That is one that we have discussed quite heavily. It's definitely on our radar. I hesitate to say what that plan is. I mean, because we've looked at various solutions. It's kind of complicated in a number of ways. One, security-wise, it's complicated, and two, it's the implementation is like how do we handle that request and everything. So it's something that's discussed all the time. I can tell you that. But as far as what the plan is, or if it's going to come out soon, your guess is as good as mine there. But we're talking about it's on our radar. Yes?
So can you kind of explain then what data this can be used on? Is it just Esri data?
Yes, so the question is, what data can Arcade be used on? Yes, Mohan at the beginning mentioned that this is primarily designed for web maps and web scenes. So we only allow you to run it in these environments that I demonstrated, like pop-up, visualization, and labeling. There's also Z values in scenes as well. But other people have brought this up before. It's like, what if I want to create my own custom profile outside of the context that we're allowing you to do it? We are very open to that, like I said in the future slide. And I am very curious to hear the use cases. And we've talked with others about use cases, and also internally within Esri, people want to execute it in their own environments. So I can give you my information. You can, if you send me the cases where you'd like to use it, then we can talk about it.
I think I just confused it. So as of right now, the only service REST endpoints have to be a Esri data source?
No, not necessarily. Okay, so no, I'm sorry. So the question is, like, do you have to have like Esri data sources to use Arcade? Is that the question? No, so the answer is no, you don't have to have that. You have to be using Esri apps and Esri APIs. So the JavaScript API you have to be using, or the runtime or Pro SDK. But you can certainly like request your own data, like GeoJSON and things like that. That all will work with Arcade. Yeah, absolutely. Yes?
You mentioned that you spend a lot of time in the playground writing your code.
Yes.
Rather than in your HTML page. Is there a way to mock your data in the playground so that you can see what it's kind of?
Yes, and that's what I end up doing. I mean, it's really pretty crudely done. Like Mohan kind of showed that a little bit where, if I'm in the playground, instead of using like $feature.fieldName, I'll just say var field name, and then I'll mock my data here. And then I'll use that, and then once I get it to a state I want to, I'll bring it back in my app and replace those. That's basically my workflow. Yes? Yes, so the question is it supported in Portal for ArcGIS? Yes, it is. And that is actually, thanks for bringing that up, because we have this version matrix available, because people ask this all the time, what type of arcade is supported, because we release new functionality, and so sometimes you're running ArcGIS Portal 10.6.1, but we talk about feature sets, but they're not there yet. So you would need to upgrade to 10.7 in order to get that capability. So yeah, so this is a really helpful page. Yeah.
Is there a way to set up like syntax highlighting or IntelliSense or VS Code for arcade that you know of?
No, we do. So that's a really interesting idea, and I've thought of this before. And the question is there a way to set up arcade syntax highlighting in VS Code? The answer is no. We do have a syntax highlighter, though, internally. So when we write this documentation on this page, we use that syntax highlighting. So I think that's great feedback that we could probably develop an extension. Are there any other questions? Yeah? Yeah. Yes, so the multi-line labels do not work on 3x or in the web map. It's just 4x.
So one other question I have, do you have any other tools to for debugging your arcade expressions like on the console or not?
No, this is one I've requested and brought up quite a bit. The question is, are there going to be other tools, or do we have other tools for debugging other than the console log? No, we don't, unfortunately. That's a lot of work to do, and we're just trying to get the functionality in. But we also, I do want to start redesigning the editor, because it's kind of thrown together. It's not perfect. You may have noticed that the playground, it's a small window, especially if you're logging messages and it bumps it up. There's a lot of little irritations with it, so we're doing a complete redesign to make it more usable, and we're also going to try to build in the expression sharing within the editor. So things like that, but that's not going to come out by UC for sure. It'll probably be later this year at the earliest. Yes? No, you just have to set up your own typings if you're writing expressions. It's fundamentally it's still just a string in TypeScript, so we don't do typings within Arcade because it's not JavaScript; it's its own thing. So no. Any other questions?
Going back to the language, does it work also on a web map?
No, it does not work on a web map. The line break does not.
All right. So do you know when it's going to be available by chance?
You're talking about the pop-up. It should be available in 3 weeks, the bug fix. Yeah. 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 And we are going to have to close up because we have someone else coming in. No, it's fine. And so, yeah, thanks for coming out, and feel free to talk to us after.